Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the M365 Voice. My name is Sarah Haase.
And I am Mike Morani.
And I'm Antonio Mayo.
All right, and are we ready to go? We're ready. We have our cup at hand?
Yeah.
Okay.
See what we got.
No exaggerated introductions. We're just going to dive right in. Oh, how do you plan large-scale migrations? Go, Mike.
Go, Mike.
Okay, that's a very open question. Migration of what? Migration of content into SharePoint, migration of tenants. So a lot of different options we have. Where are we migrating from? Are we going from on-prem to online and online to online?
Why don't we start with the base case of migrating content from on-prem to online?
Yeah, so that's the most use case scenario is on-prem to online. Large meaning that we have thousands of users, we have many tens or hundreds of terabytes of content. We have custom code, we have deprecated features, we have term store, we have custom or third-party tools. So in my experience, whether it is small, medium, or large, you're going to have to start with the analysis phase. You need to understand what kind of content you're dealing with. And that takes quite a bit of time. It depends on the size of your migration. So talking large size, you're looking at about 2 months of analysis before you get to start thinking about the plan to migrate.
And how do you do that analysis? Are you mostly running scans, or are you trusting that the customers that you're working with are going to do that analysis and provide you with good data?
As much as I love my customers, I just don't trust my customers to provide me the good data. Not just because they can't do a good job, just because when you do it over and over, first time probably I've done the analysis, I've missed a few things. So you add to your log of analysis and scans that you have to do. So you keep adding up until you get to the point it's like, okay, this is probably, I've done all the scans I can do. So I have a list of scans I do from a content perspective, from the architecture, how many sites, the level, the depth. So quite a bit of report I run against SharePoint from a content side, from the farm side, to kind of understand what the farm is all about and the actual portals they have. And I categorize everything. I categorize what is it. I deal with the content analysis. I deal with technical analysis, with farm analysis, with the solutions, third-party solution, custom code. And inside the content, I do also more categories in terms of anything to deal with external access versus just internal only. My sites also, I just categorize that separately. So I put some categories inside the content and I drill down inside the content as well, and to find out how many web apps, how many site collections, how many subsites. So it goes into a lot of details. So yeah, that's step one.
That's step one. Great. I'm glad that we covered step one.
The point about relying on customers, the customers often don't know. It's not just that they haven't done this a lot. It's also that some of the stats are hard to get. If you're coming from an on-prem SharePoint environment or even from network file shares, they often themselves have a hard time finding how much content do we have, how many users are accessing it, what are the permissions for on-prem SharePoint, right? Some of the common issues you run into, like farm solutions and deprecated features, they have a really hard time themselves telling.
Exactly.
No.
And now, Mike, you have just oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Sarah.
Then you're going to have a list of things that I would assume that you have amassed that just are automatically going to break. I would assume that, especially if you're moving from on-prem SharePoint to SharePoint Online, you're going to have workflows that are out of the box or built with third-party tools, or other workflows that are just, here's the list of things that are just not going to work. You're going to have to manually recreate. You're going to have to manually build. And I found oftentimes that that's a jagged pill for them to swallow because they just want you to magically make it happen. But there is no path to port from point A to point B for some things.
Correct. And this is what it comes, educating the clients on what can be migrated and what things that you have to build from scratch. Workflows are good examples, and custom code and custom solutions are another good example. Even third-party solutions. You might have a tool that works on that has an online version and also an on-prem, but that does not mean you can migrate it because it's completely different architecture. So everything from outside of content, honestly, it's a rebuild in online. And this is when it comes, you educate the client, and after you do the analysis, you're going to have to spend time with them to kind of teach them or educate them on the actual analysis that you made. And they have to come to some decisions on what kind of content they want to migrate, decision, as an example, that workflows that are they in use. So we'll do also like an analysis, when was the last time we ran that workflow? Typically, my experience, 70 to 80% of workflows don't get migrated.
Yep.
With workflows in particular, there's often the question of, okay, between workflow running on-prem versus a workflow running online, sometimes there's like really critical business processes that rely on those workflows. So what's going to happen to that business process in the interim between we stop it on-prem, we rebuild it online, right? Because some you can't just stop it, right? There are actual business that's relying on it, so you need some sort of a transition between the on-prem workflow and the online workflow. Whether they're you build the online one while the on-prem one's still running, and then you cut over to the online one, or some sort of a transition plan between them.
Correct. Exactly. Workflows are tricky for that specific scenario.
Yeah.
What this is one example is you just process existing workflows in on-prem, and then you'll have to run a delta migration of that data that changed after you've ran the migration for the online. So you can just copy over some of the changes through the workflow.
Right.
Yeah, and this is a painful one because this is a high business impact and oftentimes entirely new learning, because however they were building things like workflows or custom built solutions or custom styled pages or sites or site layouts from a SharePoint on-prem perspective is going to be pretty much, you can cut all of that and you're going to have to refigure out all new tooling and capabilities, even if you're using a third-party tool, because it's going to be entirely different for online versus it was on-prem.
Absolutely.
Okay, so is that step 2?
I would say 1B is determining what content and what features you want to migrate. There will be some stale content. So that's part of the analysis. 1B, I say, that's when you rely on the client to tell you what to migrate and not migrate, to tell you what kind of workflows to migrate or not. We do the analysis of the source of the code, custom code, and third-party tools, and see if they're needed or not. If they are, then you're going to have to start planning on how to do the migration.
Do a lot of people cut a bunch of stale data during that transition process? For example, say anything that hasn't been modified in the last 5 years, we want to just leave behind. We don't want to bring that over.
Correct. Yes. A lot of clients make that decision, and depends on how they want to deal with it. Some will keep their contact databases archived for another 2-3 years, or some say no, we're done with it. It's a transitory data. It's 5 years or older. Then we don't need it.
Yeah. What about, so that brings up the concept of doing a lift and shift, right, versus doing a re-architecture or reorganization of your content.
Right.
Cleanup. And despite how much I think all of us probably don't like the idea of lift and shift, there are sometimes good reasons to do a lift and shift, depending on the business scenario. So do you see more lift and shift or re-architecture, reorganize of your content?
Unfortunately, the percentage is more lift and shift than anything else. Organizations tend to kind of push back any migration up until they have to. Could be they're running out of support, it's running on an old server, and they don't have the time anymore just to do a re-architecture and cleanup. I would say 7 out of 10 of my migrations have been lift and shift.
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it's a high percentage, unfortunately.
But that means that they're in a spot where they've delayed, or maybe now they've really run out of time and they've got to do it, and they've got to do it on a timeline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because timelines for migration is not quick, especially we're talking large migration. You're looking at about a good 12 months.
Yeah, that's fair.
Does it increase the time? Sorry, if you're going multiple versions up. So, if we're not just talking SharePoint 2016 or 2019 on-prem to SharePoint Online, do you automatically start adding percentage factors more if you're going from 2013 or from 2010?
Well, there are more features that are not available if you're going from 2013 to online or 2010, but that doesn't really matter. At that point, they care about the content. And if they have any custom applications, this is where you spend more time. So custom applications, whether they are on 2010 or 2019, it's pretty much the same thing. You're going to have to rebuild it. Unless you're using SPFX web parts, on-prem, that's much easier. But someone who started investing in SPFX, a lot of people, a lot of organizations are already online, so it makes no difference.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what about some of the other planning aspects that goes into a large-scale migration? So when I think large-scale migration, I'm thinking tens to hundreds of terabytes, if not more.
Correct.
So often, as we approach a migration, we create batches. We create migration batches for the different groups or divisions or business units that are going to be migrated in, and we stage it out over a year, like you said, or more. So how do you go about defining migration batches, or do you do that?
So that's step number 2 now, is the planning aspect of the migration. After you do the analysis and after you understand from the client what needs to be migrated and not migrated, this is where the planning starts, is what kind of content we're going to migrate first and how we're going to badge that content. It could be based on a specific department or users or groups. It could be based on an application specific or content specific. Also, planning should not only involve the technology, it should also involve resources, because in a large migration, you need multiple people, and you want to involve the client as well. You want to understand what kind of skill sets they have. So you have to define how many consultants, how many resources you need to do the migration, so you can divide up the actual plan. So planning is also around not only content or technology, it's also resources to kind of make sure we plan that batches properly against different resources. So yes, we'll take the content, we classify them. Depends. It could be by classification of how secure the content is. It could be the most, like legal stuff typically is the last department to move over.
It is, right. It really is legal. Usually it's the last.
Right. IT is typically first, which is good because you can just move IT content over. If you're doing an architecture, a new information architecture, then it takes quite a bit of time to put to map out all the subsites into a flat architecture.
Yeah.
One interesting nuance I find with migrating IT. IT usually has a combination of network file shares and on-prem SharePoint. And in their network file shares, they often have files that you could migrate them to SharePoint, but they don't really fit into SharePoint, right? Executables, MSI files, ISOs, code files. How do you deal with those? Do you still leave a network file share behind to store those, or do you put those elsewhere?
I push not to migrate those, keep them in a network share or somewhere.
Yeah.
I have seen a lot of those executables or ISO files in SharePoint Online.
Really?
SharePoint Online to SharePoint Online as well, and it's the most painful migration because it takes forever.
Yeah.
So always best case is to keep them behind in a network share.
Yeah.
because you can find them. So if you lose, unless it's like an ISO that's really, really old, and then for some reason you still need it to install it somewhere, you can always go back and find it and download it from somewhere.
Yeah.
Do you find that your customers have a defined method that they want to use for the migrations, as in a specific third-party vendor or scripting? Do you find that they usually want to go a particular way, or do you usually come in and based on how much data they want to filter or what they want to do, that you would recommend a path for the how?
They usually depend on my experience in terms of what is the best approach. Scripting is not something that you want to go with. Scripting, in some cases, in preparation for the migration, yes, a lot of scripting, a lot of Excel and scripting to prep for the actual content migration and get in the actual environment ready. But then you have to use a third-party tool to do the migration.
Okay.
So it's 50-50, I would say. Some clients come with a migration tool and they say this is what we bought, and some comes with asking for recommendations.
Okay.
And for a large migration, we stage it. So we do batches. We do a lot of when we do the planning and we know exactly what content goes where. This is when we start doing the migration. And typically, in my experience, you have to look at throttling. So you can't do migration during the day. You have to do during weeknights or weekends. And then we do test migrations. We do a lot of test migrations to make sure the content is there. If there are any code that we have to kind of replicate in online, so custom code, we're going to have to build it ahead of time. Any workflows, we're going to have to build it with test content. So we have to prep the environment first from a technical perspective before we start doing some test migrations. We do some test migrations, and I measure the throughput of the migration and how much throttling I'm getting. So I can have a good idea. Maybe it's going to take me 12 weeks to do this kind of migration, or 24 weeks, whatever that is. And it's always an estimate. It's never 100. So typically 70-80%, I'm accurate with my estimates, but it all depends on. You might hit a large list that's going to take a while. So it's hit and miss.
Do you have an estimate for how much you can migrate in a day?
A weekend, yes. I can migrate about 3 to 4 terabytes in a weekend.
In a weekend? Okay.
Yes.
Usually
that's starting on a Friday at 5 and ending on Monday at 7 a.m. 5 p.m. Friday to 7 a.m. on Monday. And that's using about 14 to 15 different machines if you are doing, or 14 to 15 different jobs.
Gotcha.
Anything more, I have found that you get hit with throttling from the tenant.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So you do that, you move into a full production migration ahead of time. Then you do an incremental migration as what I call it, the switch over or the cutover weekend. So we've migrated a group, let's say HR. We do all the migration initial sync ahead of time. And then we say, okay, this weekend is when we are going to flip you over. And then we do an incremental migration of the content during the weekend. And typically you have enough time to kind of complete the Delta migration. And by Monday, you're up and running for that particular group.
Wow.
But
so it's a complicated process for everyone. What do you think? What are the top two things that your customers you find are surprised by as part of a massive migration like this? What catches them by surprise?
The time that takes the migration, actually, they don't think it takes that long. They think it's pretty quick. And they always get surprised when I tell them you have to train the users, because if you are on-prem, it's a lot different online. It's way, way, way different. So they usually don't take that into consideration. So change management and training is one thing I always push when we start the actual project. And that also starts with the analysis and planning phases.
Right.
Because I've seen failed projects when the client resisted the actual training, and it's a mess. It's not like the content is not there.
Moving from an older version of I mean, it's going to be different no matter what, but the older the version, the more massive, truly massive the change.
Bigger the change, yeah.
Yeah. I think that this was a great final thoughts, because I know we've done kind of a supersized episode on this one. So
final thoughts. Don't think it will be quick. If we're talking about large migration, plan good 12 months from the day you start until the day you actually wipe your hands clean from the on-prem. It takes about 12 months. So plan for that, budget for this, and never kill your farm. Keep your farm alive, read only, but keep it alive for at least 3 months before you completely decide to kill it off, because people will think that content is not there, content did not migrate. Maybe content did not migrate properly, because when you're dealing with large content, you're going to miss. It's not going to be 100% from day one. Yeah. You're going to have some missed content did not get migrated. You're going to have to go back and compare both environments.
If I can add to that, I would say from our experience doing migrations, the actual migration of the data, the actual moving of the data, that's the easiest part.
Definitely.
The hardest part is the analysis and the planning and the change management and training. That's where the bigger investment happens. Movement of the data, if you've done enough planning, it's really, you're pushing buttons and you're watching the data move.
Yeah. You have exactly the source and destination, you have the scripts ready, you have the tools ready. You're just clicking and watching.
That's right.
I thought this was actually a really fun episode to talk about. Good job, Mike.
Oh, thank you.
All right, we'll catch you later, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.